Andrew Little says he's looking forward to getting back to the job of being the leader of the opposition after a week spent in court defending a defamation action. He was sued for $2.3 million by Earl and Lanny Hageman, who took exception to comments he made linking a donation they made to the National Party with their company winning a contract to run a resort in Niue. Yesterday, a High Court jury said although it found one of Mr Little's comments about Mr Hageman was defamatory, it couldn't decide whether he was legally entitled to make the comment, so it couldn't order him to pay damages. Well, speaking outside the court yesterday afternoon, Mrs Hageman said she was disappointed. But she said she and Mr Hageman were studying their options for further legal action. Well, Andrew Little is in our Wellington studio this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Are you relieved?
Well, it's good to have that issue that isn't taking up a lot of my mental energy and time. Now I can get back to the job I've got to do, which is about preparing to change the government.
Do you take this as a win, this outcome?
Listen, there's as usually the case with civil litigation, there are seldom ever any winners in it. It's tied up a lot of their time and their resources. It's tied up my time. I don't take any pleasure out of it. And I know that words I used caused them hurt, and I acknowledge that and have spent some months trying to deal with them to come to terms with that. We couldn't in the end. They've had 6 days of a hearing and they've walked away with nothing. I mean, I don't think anybody takes any satisfaction from that.
Do you have any regrets about this?
The role of leader of the opposition, actually like most politicians, opposition politicians, is you've got to call the government to account. You're dealing with difficult issues. You're dealing with some ministers who can be evasive at the best of times. But when you're calling a government to account and there are third parties involved, it's difficult for them not to be kind of drawn into the various events and claims that are being made. So I've got to be able to do my job in a way that is fearless but also fair. And if I do things or use words that cause hurt, then I'm happy to step up and take responsibility, as I did in this case, although we didn't end up reaching agreement over it.
Why not just have made these comments in Parliament? Then they would have been under parliamentary privilege and there would have been no legal problem here.
So one of the promises I made myself as I went into Parliament is, and I think one of the things that a lot of New Zealanders have got cynical about politics and politicians about, is that we do all these things that, say one thing in the House and then don't say it outside the House. So I made a promise to myself. I would not say anything in the House that I'm not prepared to say outside the House for the same reason. I haven't, dressed myself up with various trusts and all the other devices that are used by some politicians to protect themselves, and frankly looks cynical from the outside.
And you do that even though that can potentially land you looking at a bill of, $2.3 million was what was being asked for here.
It's about being responsible in your judgments, and that's what you do. And I just think there is a sense that for far too many New Zealanders, they look at politicians as somewhat self-serving, and it's those sorts of things that lead them to that conclusion. And I think there's got to be a discipline on politicians, and it's got to be the same disciplines on everybody else, people who don't have access to parliamentary privilege.
Do you think that it was responsible and was disciplined to make the comments that you did?
I stand by what I did. For the reasons that I did it, and I said that in court, and I acted in good faith, but equally I recognise that the words I used caused hurt to the Hagemans, and once the Auditor-General had confirmed that the contract process that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had used was okay, was regular, then through my lawyer I set about trying to make amends with the Hagemans. Unfortunately, we didn't reach agreement, but I certainly stand by picking up the issue in the way that I did.
This isn't the first time, though, that you've been potentially in hot water for defamation since you became an MP. And you do understand this better than a lot of people because you're a lawyer. So do you think that it's a reasonable thing to do to take this course of action? When
you're the leader of the opposition in particular, and you're taking on issues about the conduct of the government, and people are involved, you're stepping or walking in sometimes very sensitive, very difficult territory. But I've got to be able to call the government to account. I've got to be able to do so fearlessly, not to do so thoughtlessly, but to do so fearlessly, and rely on information and reports and evidence that you do have. Now, sometimes that is wrong, and sometimes you say things that are hurtful, that are unintentionally hurtful, and I'm not so arrogant that I'm not prepared to step up and take responsibility for that.
So would you categorise those comments as thoughtless?
No, I wouldn't categorise them as thoughtless at all, but they are certainly comments that caused hurt to the Hagemans, and I was prepared to acknowledge that and did acknowledge that after the Auditor General reported in September last year and set about trying to make amends.
The Hageman's lawyer during the case was saying that you had trouble saying sorry. Do you think that's true?
Not at all, and I think I look at the efforts that I made through my lawyer to deal with the issue, to come to terms with the Hagemans, to resolve the issue, and knowing that by that time, because the Hagemans had applied for an early hearing, and I certainly didn't obstruct that, they did so because of Mr. Hageman's health. And part of the exchanges that I had with the Hagemans through our lawyers was to acknowledge that Mr. Hageman's health was not good. And as a former lawyer, practising lawyer and doing litigation, knowing the stress that litigation puts on people, I said that this will not be good for his health. So let's find a way to resolve this.
Why were you not in court for the verdict?
The case was set down for 5 days last week. I had commitments for yesterday, Monday. I'd actually commitments last week that I'd cancelled because of it. There was nothing that I could do yesterday that was going to make a difference. It was entirely up to the jury, and I followed through on commitments that I'd made for Monday and visits up the Kapiti Coast, and I did those.
You didn't feel it was appropriate to be in court for that final day?
No, I wasn't there much on Friday either. Once the jury had retired to consider their verdicts, I basically on Friday went back to the office. I spent the day in the office, meant that I could keep abreast of what was happening in Syria and a range of other things. And I had to make a decision, do I cancel my Monday's appointments? The way the jury was going on Friday, it was clear that it was going to take them some time. And I made the decision that I would follow through on the commitments that I'd made to various other people, other New Zealanders, to go to their places and be with them yesterday, and that's what I did.
Will you continue to speak in the way that you did that may land you in defamatory hot water again because you don't want to hide behind parliamentary privilege?
I will continue to fearlessly pursue the government and call them to account. I will be looking very carefully at third parties involved, but I am not going to resign. I cannot resign from my job of calling the government to account and doing so fearlessly. So I'm not put off by that. And yep, the nature of the leader of the opposition's job is there are plenty of stressors in it. I'm used to stress, and I think I deal with it pretty well. But I think I'm very careful about the issues that I pick up and what I do. What I have to do as a moral obligation to fulfil my role as leader of the opposition.
And there may yet be more stress down the line because there is the possibility looming of a retrial here. I would think it's unlikely you would be relishing that in election year.
Yeah, I mean, this trial, from the time an application was made to set it down, was about 7 months. But yeah, the Hagemans now have some options with their lawyers to consider. The jury, there were 4 claims they made that they couldn't make decisions on. They therefore have the option of a retrial. There may well be issues they want to go to the Court of Appeal on before that retrial, so there may be more stuff to go. But that's what happens. In the end, we had the opportunity to resolve this some weeks ago. It would have given them some cash. They spent 6 days in the High Court in Wellington and got absolutely nothing. So they're going to have to think carefully about what it is for them.
Andrew Little, leader of the Labour Party, thank you very much for your time this morning.